A tragic death, a mystery in a big home in a small rural Arkansas town. This mom was found dead alongside her 2 young children. The authorities say the 3 of them were shot. We're diving into this mom's past, including her marriage.
Give me your phone. I'm shutting it off.
Here comes the next one.
And a divorce that just ended a day before her and her children's deaths. What her doctor ex-husband's lawyer is now saying as the questions mount about what happened. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick, before we get into this episode of On the Case, one of the top shows on YouTube, I want to talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm. They're a firm with over 1,000 attorneys who have recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months alone, a client in Florida received $12 million when insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million, 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim from your phone. So if you're injured, you can start a claim at forthepeople.com/OTC. You can click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. The marriage between a woman named Charity Beallis and a doctor named Randall Beallis, based on what we're seeing in court records, could be described as toxic. Now here's a picture of Charity with who we believe are her 2 children. Their names have not been released as of yet, so we're blurring their faces. Both of them were roughly 6 years old. Now they lived in the tiny town of Bonanza, Arkansas. Very small town, right along the Oklahoma border. Population 575. It's not far from Fort Smith, Arkansas, but we're talking about a rural place. And this home is where Charity lived. It's a massive 4-bedroom house down a rural, secluded road. Zillow says the house is roughly $800,000 in value, and that is nearly 4 times the amount of the average home price in that town. Now, Charity's husband has been identified as a man named Randall Beallis, or Randy. He's a doctor in nearby Fort Smith. Healthgrades.com says he practices family medicine and he has more than 25 years of experience. Now this is what he looks like in a very different light, because this is a mugshot of Dr. Beallis from his arrest in February of this year. And this is where we get to the part of the story that really starts to dive into the issues that went on in the marriage between a mom who is now dead, the dad, this doctor, and their 2 children who are also now dead. Now we want to note that at the time of this recording, the cause of death of Charity and the 2 kids has not been determined, and Dr. Beallis has not been named a suspect. There's been no suspect in this case, according to law enforcement. No arrests that we know of have been made in connection to the deaths, and the cause of death for those 3 people, it's still being looked at by the medical examiner. But let's dive into the history of this marriage, and let's go to February. That's when Dr. Beallis was arrested on charges of domestic battering purposely, 2 counts of endangering the welfare of a minor in the 3rd degree, and aggravated assault on a family or household member by choking. According to court records, the doctor allegedly choked Charity in front of their children at their home. He pleaded guilty to domestic battery in the 3rd degree on October 6th of this year. Now, it doesn't appear that he was sentenced to prison time, but he was fined $1,500, and he was ordered to have no contact with Charity, and he could only have contact with their children with court approval. Now, this wasn't the first time that the marriage of the Beallises seemed toxic. Watch this.
Give me your phone. I'm shutting it off.
Here comes the next one. What are you gonna do? It's called being the parent, buddy.
My truck in my name.
Yep.
I paid for it.
Yep.
Give me that phone.
Now, this is a video that is going viral right now because of the story that we're following and the people who are involved. This was posted, though, to Facebook all the way back in May 2020. And what you're watching, reportedly, is Charity and Dr. Beallis in a confrontation. And the confrontation is with someone who's been identified as Charity's now adult son. He was 17 at the time. The video was posted on an account with the name Lonnie Mitz on Facebook. The poster writes, quote, "This is Dr. Randall Scott Beallis and his wife Charity disciplining her son for not returning a text as soon as they thought he should. They appear in court in the morning to decide custody of the 17-year-old and the two babies seen in the video. Please share this, as those two shouldn't be in charge of a pet, much less children, end quote. It appears that Charity, again, has a 17-year-old son on top of the two children who were found dead inside of the house. And on May 20th, not long after that video was posted back in 2020, Charity's then 17-year-old son filed an emancipation document asking that he get the rights of an adult. He was only a couple months shy of being 18 years old. And in his request, he states, quote, that on the 14th day of May 2020, that Charity Beallis and Randy Beallis did take a knife or ice pick and slashed and ruined the tires of John Randall Powell's 2005 Ford F-150 vehicle, that he bought the vehicle and the same is titled in his name. That John Randall Powell has a video of Charity Beallis and Randy Beallis doing the same. End quote. The request was approved in June of 2020. Now, this does not appear to have any connection, as of right now, to what happened more than 5 years after that video was taken, to this point in time where we are talking about the deaths of Charity and her two children. So you can see from that there were issues in this marriage, to say the least. The word that keeps coming to my mind is toxic, volatile. Also a good word to describe it. Now, on top of the doctor's arrest, Charity had filed for divorce in March. That is after Dr. Beallis allegedly strangled her in front of their children. Now, in her complaint, Charity's attorney points out that Dr. Beallis had been arrested on domestic violence charges and accuses the doctor of having previous cases of domestic abuse. It demands that he go to anger management, that he have a mental health evaluation. Charity also wanted full custody of their two kids. The divorce proceedings went on for months. 5 News in Arkansas reports that on December 2nd of this year, there was a final hearing held at the courthouse in Fort Smith when it came to this divorce proceeding. Then we get to December 3rd, and that is when this story takes a dark and fatal turn. It was around 9:30 in the morning that the local sheriff's office in Sebastian County, Arkansas, was called to the house where Charity was living with her two kids. Her husband was not living there anymore because of the no contact order related to the domestic abuse case. Now, the call was for a welfare check. The Sebastian County Sheriff's Office writes on Facebook that 2 workers allowed them to get access to the home, and that is when they made that terrible, terrible discovery. They found Charity was dead, and also with her 2 6-year-old children. All 3 of them had been shot. Now, it is unclear at this point if deputies believe those gunshots were fired by someone who was outside the home and came in and attacked them, or perhaps did Charity harm herself and her kids. Deputies say the Arkansas Crime Lab is currently working to determine that. Now, the day after Charity and her kids were found dead, Dr. Beallis' attorney filed a motion to dismiss the divorce case, saying, quote, the plaintiff has passed away. Now, the attorney for Dr. Beallis has also released a statement, as local media has named the doctor, as stories of this are now being told, as there's a ton of attention in trying to figure out what happened to Charity and her kids. Per 5 News in Arkansas, Michael Pierce, Dr. Beallis' attorney, said, quote, Mr. Beallis has been cooperative with law enforcement and fully supports the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office investigation. We hope the Sheriff's Office finds the truth about what happened to Miss Charity Beallis and their children, end quote. 5 News also reports that Beallis' lawyer says that the doctor was recently awarded joint custody of their children during that December 2nd hearing that happened just a day before Charity and the kids were found dead. Dr. Beallis, again, has not been named a suspect in the deaths of his wife and children. We are waiting on information from law enforcement on whether they believe these deaths are the result of a homicide. Join us now to talk a little bit more about this case, where it could go from here, is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Anthony Asso. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. A lot of questions unanswered at this point. We know that this was a marriage that I think it's safe to say it was toxic, to say the least.
Yes.
And a lot was going on up until the death of this woman and her 2 children. What stands out to you at this point?
Well, from my perspective, I think what stands out the most to me is that you have the woman and both her children dead in their home, which obviously, just from an emotional standpoint, that's an absolute tragedy. But I think it's the unknowns that stand out to me at this point. Obviously, I think Randall Beallis is a suspect, or at least a person of interest in this case. And from my perspective, the fact that he has been charged with and resolved. I'm not sure if he was convicted or whether it was some sort of deferred prosecution, but for domestic violence against Charity Beallis is something that stands out to me with regard to where this investigation is going.
Before we get into kind of what we know at this point, and law enforcement in Sebastian County, Arkansas, haven't said too much beyond what they found at this home, a pretty big home too, in this small town outside Fort Smith. But the day after that Charity and these two children are found dead in the home, Dr. Beallis' attorney files a motion to dismiss this divorce case. And when you read that, at least for me, it's like, wow, that was fast, to run to the court and say, hey, divorce proceedings are over. How do you read into that part of the story?
I take it a little differently, Chris, just because from a lawyer's standpoint, we compartmentalize emotions from the job that we're required to do, right? And so ultimately, when one of the parties is dead or no longer is with us, then that suit is sort of done. It's moot at that point. And so from a lawyer's perspective, I just see that as a lawyer filing a motion to dismiss with the court as is necessary to close out a file in a case that's not going to continue on.
And in this case, as far as the divorce proceedings are concerned, because, sadly, one of the parties of this divorce is dead, and the two children that they had together tragically are dead. Why do you still need to even file a motion to end this case if, sadly, for all intents and purposes, like the marriage has concluded?
That's a good question. I think ultimately the court could dismiss the case sua sponte, but it's the lawyer, it's their job to resolve matters, right, for their clients. And so from my perspective, that's something that lawyer was doing on behalf of his client, Randall Beallis, right? Whether at this point, Randall's not a suspect. And so I think that the lawyer is just operating under the assumption that she's been killed, the case is moot, and the case needs to be resolved and concluded. And the fastest way to do that is through filing a motion to dismiss.
Clearly, the deaths are going to come back from the medical examiner as gunshot wounds for being the cause of death. But just from your time as a prosecutor, what are some of the other things on scene that investigators need to look for in figuring out whether Charity was the one who fired these shots and sadly perhaps took her own life, or if this was something where a suspect came into this home where it was only her and the children living at the time that this happened and took their lives?
Well, in addition to the gunshot wounds, like you mentioned, Chris, you've got to look at the placement of certain objects within the home. Most specifically, I want to know, where was the firearm in relation to Charity Beallis' body when the officers made that scene and found her body? Was it within arm's distance, or was it in another room? That's going to be a big indicator as to whether somebody had a hand in these killings, which could make it go from suicide to homicide. Additionally, I would want to look at all points of entry into the home. Is there anything to indicate that there were break-ins, that windows were broken, footprints on the doors? I'm sure that they've got CSU in that home right now pursuant to a search warrant, probably looking for fingerprints and things like that, so that they can try to determine whether there was somebody that didn't belong in the home present in the house at around the time that their bodies were found.
What can you do in the short term where we're waiting to hear back from, crime scene investigators on whether or not they think that these were self-inflicted gunshot wounds or not? What is the district attorney doing right now? What are police doing in the meantime? Because there is a possibility that this comes back and it is actually a homicide.
Right. I think it's an all hands on deck investigation. And so the quickest thing that investigators can do is obviously continue to search and process the home where these killings took place. Secondly, I would want to look into Charity Beallis' phone, because they don't need a warrant in an effort to do that. They can do so without it. So the quicker they can get inside that phone, they can look at text messages and things like that to see who she was communicating with up until and at around the time of the killings in this case. So those are things that they can do in an effort to try and establish probable cause to get further search warrants to potentially search things like Randall Beallis' cell phone records, or cell site location records for where Randall Beallis' phone might have been at the time of the killing. So I think you start with searching of the home and searching of her cell phone.
And again, Randall Beallis is not a suspect at this point.
Right.
We don't know if there are suspects in this case, and that's according to the local sheriff's office. He does have an attorney. That attorney released a statement saying that he has cooperated fully with the local sheriff's office. I feel like sometimes what the definition of cooperating fully is from a defense attorney's perspective and a detective's can be very, very different. When someone has a defense attorney already and there's a death investigation going on, what does like fully cooperating from that side, the defense side, actually look like?
In my perspective, fully cooperating means if I'm asked to go in and give a statement, I go and give a statement. If I'm asked to give you my cell phone and password so that you can search my phone, I give you my cell phone and my password to search my phone. If you want keys to the house, cars, garages, anything of that nature, I'm allowing you to do so. So I don't know, like you said, Chris, at this point, he's not a suspect. I think the medical examiner's findings ultimately will determine the cause of death as well as the manner of death. Manner of death being either suicide or homicide. And the minute it's homicide, I've got to think that Randall Beallis becomes a suspect in this case based on the documented violence we've seen up until this point, along with the divorce proceeding where they were both awarded custody of the children in this case. I think there's enough motive there that the police will at least be somewhat interested in looking into whether he was responsible for these killings.
Is he required, if, say, police are looking at this, we don't know the cause of death officially as of yet, self-inflicted or not, does he have to go in? If police call and say, hey, we would like to interview you, and from police's perspective, it'd probably be more of an interrogation. That phone call comes into your law office if you were defending him. Like, how does that conversation go?
No, if he comes into my law office, my first rule of order would be to have a conversation about what happened, what he knows about it, and his whereabouts at that time, right? Because in the event that I think that there's evidence to establish he had nothing to do with these killings, then it might be in a client's best interest to go and speak to the police. But that's really the exception to the rule. So to answer your first question, no, you don't have to go and talk to homicide. As a matter of fact, you need to go consult a lawyer before you ever go and speak to police officers about a criminal matter, especially one as severe as the death of two children and your wife. So you can invoke your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and also request a lawyer the minute that investigators reach out to you.
You look at this divorce proceeding that played out, and they have their final hearing on the 2nd. According to his attorney, who spoke to this TV station 5 News in Arkansas, Dr. Beallis was awarded partial custody, which is different than what Charity Beallis wanted. She wanted full custody of these kids based off of what we've read in court documents. How could that factor into what potentially played out in the home?
Sure. From my perspective, that plays into the defense's favor in this case. I think if there's any argument to be made that this was a suicide and let's just assume for all intents and purposes, Randall Beallis is a suspect and ultimately a defendant, that's the only way I think the divorce becomes relevant. But in that case, to me, it might state, well, look, the complainant wanted life to be a certain way. She didn't get what she wanted. She was already deathly afraid. And I don't know that I'd argue she was deathly afraid of Randall Beallis, but she already didn't like or felt some type of way about Dr. Beallis. And so when the divorce proceeding resulted in the way that it did, she felt that her only option at that point was to take her own life and her kids' lives. Again, I don't know that there's going to be evidence to corroborate that. But from me, that's the only way it would become relevant down the line. From my perspective, that's the only way it become relevant.
And another part of this that's kind of like parallel is, so in the domestic violence case, and in February, he was accused of strangling her in front of their 2 kids, which is terrifying when you think of these young kids. They're just 6 when they die. Then she files for divorce. And then in October, he pleads guilty to a lesser charge. He was facing multiple charges. He pleads guilty. I think it was a 3rd-degree domestic violence assault charge. So it's not as much as what he was charged with in the first place, and that could have gone to trial, and he could have faced all these. But then I think of the fact that he was given, according to his attorney, partial custody of these kids. And a roundabout way of asking is like, is the plea deal to something lesser play into his favor with whether he gets custody of the kids? Because it's not like he was found guilty of the slew of charges he was facing and the narrative from police when this all went down back in February.
Absolutely, Chris. I think anytime you're dealing with the evaluation of whether a parent should have custody, you're going to want to look at what he's ultimately pleading to or what he or she is ultimately convicted of, right? And so when you take it from second degree down to third degree, that's something that any judge is going to take into consideration. I still think family violence is something that's heavily weighs against awarding a parent custody, but I'm sure that the judge took into consideration that the plea was to a reduced charge as opposed to the aggravated charges that he was originally facing.
And then just generally when it comes to some of these cases, because it's not the first time I've seen a case where you have a very charged divorce proceeding, kids are involved, custody, you think of the emotion on every side that has to do with this, and then you see violence around that time. What parameters are in place? Are there any parameters in place where, looking after people, I think of after, say, December 2nd, it doesn't go her way, or maybe it went in a way where he was upset about it, and we don't, again, we'll see what the cause of death is, but making sure that, what can be done to prevent violence, suicide, anything like that in connection to some of these cases where, the divorce ends and then they leave the courthouse and move on with their lives.
Right. Well, I think it starts with protective orders, right? And then, which can be issued in family cases, and it can be issued in family cases, especially when there's documented family violence like we have from the criminal case by Mr. Beallis against Miss Beallis. But it's also, it differs from the family system as opposed to the criminal system. In the criminal system, when a defendant is facing or is pending charges, the court has the ability to put an ankle monitor on that suspect. They have an ability to attach bond or bail to that suspect's case. If they violate or are found to have violated any of the bond conditions, the judge can revoke the bond and take them into custody, right? So they're always facing the idea or the potential that they could go back into custody for any violation of a bond condition. It's a little bit different in family court. There can be orders put in place to prevent certain people or parties from having contact with one another, and ultimately violation of those orders can result in criminal charges, but you don't have the ability to revoke their bail and put them into custody to hang over their head. You don't have the ability to put an ankle monitor on that person. So there are less protections, in my opinion, in the family court system as opposed to the criminal justice system.
With so many things pending in this case, we don't know if we're talking about a homicide right now or just a really tragic murder-suicide. From whether it's the DA, the local sheriff's office, are they keeping tabs likely on Dr. Beallis right now? Or is that something where they're just in touch with the attorney, and then if they have to head in that direction of charges one way or another, that's when they get in touch with them to bring them in?
If I had to guess, they're absolutely keeping tabs on Mr. Beallis. And the thing about this ongoing investigation is before Mr. Beallis is in custody, the investigators they have more latitude and freedom to work with and talk with him, right? The minute that he becomes a suspect or they feel that there's probable cause, one, I think he's going to be on heightened alert and not want to cooperate with them and probably just revoke his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and make them get warrants with regard to everything, with all information they want him to provide them. So I think they have tabs on him, but not jumping to conclusions allows the investigators in this case to get more information before they ever engage his lawyer about potentially having him make a statement. So I think that they are keeping tabs, but I think they're developing their case before they go down those avenues of investigation.
I know every municipality, every city is different when it comes to stuff like this, but say this was happening where you are in Texas, how long would you expect a crime lab to take to be able to come to a determination on the cause of death?
I mean, in a busy metropolitan city, I'm in Houston, it could be a matter of months, right? I think on a case with heightened, I think that this is a critical case. I think that it's a smaller town. This is an outstanding crime. So I imagine that their crime lab will expedite the results in this case and probably get on it, I think, within a matter of weeks. You don't want to rush it so fast, though, that you don't preserve the integrity of the investigation and the integrity of the evidence, right? Everything has to go through a protocol, chains of custody, properly testing. You can't rush things through in an effort to get answers and not do it the right way.
Yeah, and as of right now, Monday morning, as we're recording this, it's been several days since Charity Beallis and their 2 children found dead. We'll see how this story plays out. A lot of questions still unanswered at this point. Anthony Osso, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.